Welcome to The Other Side, Mississippi Today's political podcast. I'm your host, Adam Ganishow. The Other Side lets you hear directly from the most connected players and observers across the spectrum of politics in Mississippi. From breaking news to political strategy to interviews with candidates and elected officials, we'll bring you facts, perspectives, and context that helps you cut through the noise and understand all sides of the story.
Welcome to The Other Side, Mississippi Today's political podcast. I'm Geoff Pender, joined here today, as usual, with my colleague Bobby Harrison.
Hey, Geoff.
And today we have sort of an introduction to make. We're also joined by our colleague and newest member of our political team, going to help us with legislative coverage with a focus on public education, is Simeon Gates. Simeon, welcome.
Hi.
Yay, Simeon. How you doing?
Great. How are you?
Good.
Simeon's not new to Mississippi Today. She served previously as an intern. She attended my alma mater, Southern Miss, to the top, and Bobby's Southern Miss to the top. Where she was an award-winning student journalist. She has been working at Mississippi Today for a while as a general assignment reporter, and like I said, she's going to be joining the political team and kind of like drinking from a fire hose and covering the vaunted Mississippi Legislature this year. And also we have a special guest today. A lot of people in Mississippi government and who deal with public education will know her. We have Nancy Loome. She is executive director of the Parents Campaign, which has been a leading advocate for many years now for public education in Mississippi. Nancy, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, Geoff, I remember Nancy going way before the Parents Campaign forum. She was just a mother in Clinton coming to the Capitol to advocate for education funding. So she's been at this for a long time.
Yeah, and I should say Clinton Public Schools, also one of my alma maters. I went through like fifth grade there, I believe. So
Go Arrows.
Thank you for joining us. Simeon, I'm guessing you've been dealing with a lot of these issues recently, and I'm guessing you probably have some questions for Nancy, so we'll let you get us started.
All right. Nancy, what issues in like K through 12 education do you think are going to come up in next year's legislative session?
Some things that we're watching for. Of course, in the last session, the 2024 session, the legislature adopted a new school funding law. So we'll be watching to see if there are any changes to that. The law called for the Department of Education to recommend any technical changes that they might suggest. So we'll be watching to see what those might be, and also to see that it is fully funded, as the legislature has committed to doing. We'll also be looking at initiatives that might help to mitigate the teacher shortage. You know, we've been dealing with a very serious teacher shortage for a number of years. And in recent sessions, the legislature has taken some steps to address that shortage, but it still is a factor. And so teacher pay is one of those things that has a very significant impact on teacher retention, as well as attracting new people into the teaching profession. So that's something that we're going to be interested in seeing, is if the legislature might consider a pay raise, a teacher pay raise. We think it's time for another of those. The most recent one was passed in the 2022 legislative session and was significant. But we all know that inflation has also been significant in the years since and has pretty much eaten up, in fact, pretty immediately ate up all the benefit that teachers were seeing from that pay raise, in addition to increases in the premiums for the state health insurance. And so whereas immediately following the passage of that pay raise, Mississippi had moved to the front of the line in terms of starting teacher salaries, both among our neighboring states, but also nationwide. We were very competitive, and also with average teacher salary. Unfortunately, well, I guess fortunately for the teachers in other states, unfortunately for us in terms of our ranking, other states immediately followed suit and also passed significant pay raises. And so Mississippi is once again back to the very bottom among our neighbors in starting teacher pay. And a recent estimate of average teacher salary overall just came out and has Mississippi 48 in the nation. So we once again are back to the bottom in teacher pay. And that is a significant factor in retaining teachers, especially in our border counties that are on the borders with other states where teachers can drive just a few miles across the state line and earn significantly more. So that's something that we're looking for, teacher pay. There's also been some talk about changing the statute, what the law says about our state accountability model. We believe that it would actually be better if the law did not include details about the state accountability model, but rather just required an accountability model and left it to the State Department of Education to figure out those details. We also will be watching for privatization legislation that would send public money to private schools, which is something that we oppose. And we'll be watching as the state talks about the potential for tax cuts, state tax cuts. I mentioned needing to fully fund the school funding formula. We need a teacher pay raise. We need to make sure that our roads and bridges are safe. And so we want to make sure that if our state leaders are going to talk about reducing state revenue, that they are factoring in all of their obligations and that all of their obligations to provide for our children are going to be covered. So those are a few of the things that we'll be watching for.
In terms of the potential tax cut, Nancy, and education needs, you talked about teacher pay, but there's other needs I would assume in the schools too, in terms of like counselors and especially in these times where they talk about the mental health of students and everything, that counselors and those types of things. I assume there's a lot of shortages of those in a lot of the schools across the state.
Absolutely, Bobby. Mental health is a tremendous factor, and it's something that our superintendents are talking a lot about as they look for ways to address the needs of their students. And one of the things that we're finding in terms of mental health, we need some more counselors in schools, and of course, that costs money. They also need resources to contract with third-party providers for some of the more serious issues that students are facing. And they're finding that they need resources to do that. They also need more providers. That's something that the Department of Mental Health, I think, has raised as an issue as well, is that Mississippi has a shortage of mental health providers, generally speaking. And that is something that has an impact on students' ability to learn. So you're right about that. Also, we have seen such great success with our literacy effort as the legislature has devoted more resources to literacy, reading instruction in the early years. Kindergarten through third grade has been their focus. We have seen a tremendous result from that. All those years ago when the Parents Campaign was first founded, Mississippi was near the bottom in rankings among states for our national test scores in reading and math. And in our most recent results that we have it's actually from the 2022 test, Mississippi now ranks 21st in the nation in fourth grade reading. And so those literacy investments have made a tremendous difference. What we know is that as students move on through the middle grades, they still need an additional investment in literacy in those grades. Stopping at third grade is not enough. we believe that we would continue to see similar excellent results if we had additional resources focused on grades 4 through 8. That is something that the Mississippi Department of Education is working on. They are working on a plan for that. And so it's not something that we would expect to request funding for in the coming year, but possibly in the year after that, when the department has had an opportunity to outline its program to address those needs.
Nancy, one thing you mentioned that I believe Simeon had given me a little briefing on the other day as well is with the teacher pay issue. You mentioned insurance. I think we've seen over the past few years some comparisons, and basically a family policy is costing our teachers a lot more than maybe some neighboring states. Is that correct?
That's right. And the insurance coverage is also better in neighboring states. I actually have some percentages of what the states actually invest in insurance coverage in other states. In Mississippi, it's about 34% of the total coverage. In Alabama, for example, it's 65%. Both Arkansas and Tennessee provide 75% of that coverage from state funds. So that's a pretty significant difference, and their coverage is actually better. So it's a huge quality of life issue. It has an impact on the take-home pay of our teachers and the quality of the health care that they and their families receive. So it's a huge teacher retention issue.
So let me get this. So what you're saying is, in round numbers, in Mississippi, the state's providing 30% of the cost of the health insurance. In Tennessee, they're providing 70%. Is that
75? That's right.
That's amazing.
That's right. It's a big difference.
Yeah. I don't want to harp on you referenced that the funding formula was changed during the 2024 session. And this is going to be the year where they're obligated to fully fund it. I mean, y'all had reservations about the changes to the funding formula during the session, but at the end, I mean, the proposal that came out of the House took away the objective funding formula that had been the hallmark of in Mississippi since the mid-90s. But the final formula had that put in a different mechanism, but still an objective formula to determine how much money the schools need, instead of the legislature just saying, this is how much we're going to give you. So I assume that y'all were okay with the final version of that change.
Yes, we were very grateful that the legislature listened to the education community and did add an objective formula for the base cost. It just makes sense that the base cost is the most important part of the formula, because the weights, the rest of it, the need-based funding, is simply a percent of whatever the base cost is. So that's the most important piece of the formula. And the original proposal just allowed the legislature to pick a number every year. It wasn't based on what the actual needs of children or their schools might be. So this objective formula actually tells us what it costs to provide a quality education in Mississippi for a student. And that gives us the base cost. And then there is the additional funding, which has been referred to as weights, because they're percentages, for things like special education, children who live in poverty, children for whom English is not their first language and they're learning to speak English, children in gifted classes. All of those things provide additional funding that's added on to the base cost. And they also added an inflation factor to keep up with inflation.
Which also was not in the original formula.
That was not in the original proposal, but it was in the final proposal, right? So the final proposal was a very good formula. It actually has a lot of the components that the MAEP had that made it a strong formula. So we were pleased and grateful that the legislature, again, listened to the education community and came through with what I think is a good law.
Great. Nancy, you touched on this a bit. We know that school choice is probably going to start becoming a big issue next year. Can you go into what school choice is and how it would work?
So school choice, which really is a misnomer, it really, what we're really talking about is using public funds to pay for private school tuition, or to send public funds to private schools. The question is, should the public pay for whatever choice a parent makes? Do we want to use public resources to fund private schools? And the answer for most people is no. Public funds, our tax dollars, are to be used for the public good. And that is what our public schools provide. They provide a place for every child. Every child is welcome in a public school. And we have state standards that are quite rigorous, that all of those schools are required to meet, and we measure those, and we report. The public can see how well their schools are performing according to those standards. So there's accountability to the public. There's accountability for how their funds are spent. They are audited. And none of those things are true for private schools. They do not have a set of standards that they are required to meet. The public does not have access to how they spend their funds. They pick and choose the students that they want to educate. So not every child has access. And so it really is not, with vouchers, which send public money to private school, it isn't the parents who get to make that final choice. It is the private schools that get to make that choice. And they are designed to be exclusive. That's why they are private. In fact, there is a statement on the year-end report of the Private School Association in Mississippi, the Mid-South Association of Independent Schools, that says that school choice is very dangerous because it is about being inclusive. And so clearly, private schools are not designed to be inclusive. They are not designed to welcome every child. They are not designed for the public good. And so it is simply not appropriate to use public dollars for something that is not intended as a public good, that is closed to a lot of students. And if you look at what voters have said and what polling tells us, it is not a popular idea to send public money to private schools. Every single time this issue has been put before voters in any state, it has been defeated. Most recently, in this November election, where 3 states had ballot measures asking about whether or not they should use public dollars to fund private schools, and it lost in every one of them. Those were Nebraska, Kentucky, and Colorado. And in Nebraska, the legislature had actually passed a voucher law, and that state allows its voters to repeal or end a law that they don't like. And they voted overwhelmingly to repeal the voucher law that the legislature had passed. So people agree that public tax dollars should benefit the public. They should be for the public good. They should not be used to pay for just any choice that a parent might make. And I think it's also important to point out that research has shown conclusively that students who use vouchers to go to private school, students that leave public school to go to private school, show persistent learning loss. Public schools outperform private schools, generally speaking. And it also, these research also showed that the private school voucher students who then left the private school and returned to the public school showed gains in student achievement. So we're talking about the very same students doing more poorly when they left public schools to go to private schools and doing better when they left private schools to go to public schools. That's just simply not a good use of our tax dollars to pay for an inferior education for students. We also know that in other states that have passed these voucher laws, overwhelmingly, the majority of those vouchers are going to pay the tuition of students who already were attending private school. Arkansas passed a voucher law just a couple of years ago, and in their first year, the year that we have data for, 95% of those vouchers went to children who either were already enrolled in private school or were first-time students just entering kindergarten, but they had never attended a public school. So we're not talking about people making different choices because of vouchers. We are talking about the public subsidizing private school tuition for students who already were attending private schools and whose parents could afford to pay the tuition. They were already paying the tuition. And we know that the private schools know this. And so what we see typically is that when voucher laws pass, private schools raise their tuition because they know that the students they want to admit, the ones they already have, can afford to pay it. They're already paying it. And so it's just public tax dollars going to pay for students who already were enrolled in private schools and can afford to do that. And as we talk about reducing state revenues and what the state can afford to pay for, I don't think a new line item to pay private school tuition for children who are already in private school is what most people would choose as a good use of those tax dollars.
I know Mississippi already has some school choice programs in place. You talk about those. I believe that it came up last year when they tried to pass a law expanding tax credits that there is little, if any, data over how many students these programs actually help.
That's right. There is a tax credit program called the Children's Promise Act, and half of those tax credits go to subsidize private schools. Those are just dollar for dollar tax credits that corporations can get. These can be little LLCs, or any corporation can get for a donation to a private school, and individuals can get that same credit on their ad valorem taxes for a donation to a private school. And so that is not even connected to the admission of any new students. That is not about school choice. That is simply diverting money that is owed to the state to private schools. Folks, instead of writing a check to the state, can write a check to their private school and get credit for it as if they had paid their taxes. So it reduces the funding that we have to spend on public goods. But there is no mandate that they admit any new students, that there's no regulation about how those funds can be used. The schools are not required to report any data about the types of students they serve or how those funds are used. It is simply a state subsidy to private schools. That measure was kind of sneaked in to a bill that was framed as support for organizations that serve children in foster care, which of course everybody wants to support. And when legislators became aware that half of those funds were going to private schools, they stopped being willing to increase the amount of funding that they were allowing to be used for that program. And fortunately, last year there was an effort by a couple of legislators to increase very dramatically the cap on those tax credits, and that was defeated.
But the existing program is still in effect.
The existing program is still in effect. It is. And there, through that, there's about $9 million every year going to subsidize private schools, again, with no oversight at all, no report on how those funds are used, what children are served, that sort of thing.
Nancy, as we speak, some potentially monumental things going on in Washington pertaining to education. Want to get your take on that. Number one, talk of abolishing the federal Department of Education. Number two, we have a new nominee, Ms. McMahon, to run that. What are your thoughts on that? What you're seeing in Washington?
We'll see if the Department of Education is eliminated. The Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Education, has some very important functions. They have oversight of special education laws and regulations that make sure that children who have special needs are properly served. It's one of the most important services that our public education system provides. And it is the U.S. Department of Education that makes sure that those children's needs are being served well. They also provide some important funding, federal funding for Title I, which is children in low-income households, special education funding, and some a little other funding in addition to that. Those funds could continue to flow even if the department were abolished. They could just be appropriated and be run through a different department. So it is the oversight that I think is the greatest concern, that I hope our senators and congressmen will take seriously and think seriously about how important it is that we make sure that every single child has access to a quality education, including children with special needs. So we'll see how all that pans out, but those are the primary concerns.
Yeah, there's been talk. President-elect Trump has talked about eliminating the Department of Education, but I hadn't heard much talk about how the money that flows to the states would be administered, or whether it would still be going to the states. But Mississippi has a lot to lose. I mean, we get more money. I think the schools' primary source of revenue to public schools is the state, and then the local government, but they still get a sizable chunk of money. I think more than most states do from the federal government. So that's an important issue in Mississippi, how that money is. If that money continues to flow to Mississippi.
It is a very important issue, and it's something that the state legislature should be concerned about, because if we want our schools to continue to do well, and by the way, our schools are doing very well in Mississippi, which is something that we haven't yet talked about, but we have seen some pretty dramatic increases in proficiency rates in Mississippi. It is a lot to be proud of. And those resources are very, very important to that progress. And so if that federal funding were to go away, the state legislature would need to find some way to make that up for our local districts. Those programs that are funded with federal dollars are absolutely essential to the kind of progress that we've seen. And, when our schools thrive, our communities thrive. When corporations are looking at moving to a new location, they don't ask how your private schools are doing. They want to know how your public schools are doing. And so some of the advances we've seen in economic development, I think, can be credited to our public schools for doing such a great job, and all of the wonderful national attention that we've gotten for improving proficiency rates among our students. Our teachers have done a tremendous job. They really are to be commended for the advancements that they've made, and our students and parents as well.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in education, and we could talk about it for a long time. But I know you're busy, and we appreciate you doing this, and we'll probably be talking to you more during the upcoming session. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Welcome aboard, Simeon.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for talking with us, Nancy.
Thank you.
As we cover the biggest political stories in the state, you don't want to miss an episode of The Other Side. We'll bring you more reporting from every corner of the state, sharing the voices of Mississippians and how they are impacted by the news. So what do we need from you, the listener? We need your feedback and support. Subscribe to our weekly podcast on your favorite podcast app or stream episodes online at MississippiToday.org/The Other Side. For the Mississippi Today team, I'm Adam Ganeshow. The Other Side is produced by Mississippi Today and engineered by Blue Sky Studios. We hope you'll join us for our next episode.